And to discuss the economic impact of these tariffs, Gordon Houlden joins us from Canada. He's a former Canadian diplomat, as well as the professor and director emeritus of the China Institute at the University of Alberta. Sir, great having you. And I'd like to get your first impression. How do you expect this to play out in the next few hours, days?
Well, this is the dominant story for Canada and for Mexico as well, I believe. We are deeply dependent on the U.S. market, both Canada and Mexico sending roughly 80% of our exports to what is the world's largest market. We have gotten very used to having this privileged access, depending upon it for our prosperity. This will send a sharp shock through the Canadian economy, may tip us into recession if these tariffs are kept in place for a considerable time.
Professor Houlden, do you see negative consequences for the United States?
The United States is not, of course, as dependent upon exports to Canada as they are, as we are, for our own exports to the United States. But there will be effect. U.S. is, in effect, the three largest export markets are Canada, Mexico, and China in that order. And by putting tariffs on all of those, and they will inevitably be rolled back. The Canadian and Mexican governments already said that they will retaliate. This will add, at a minimum, to the cost for U.S. consumers, and it may stoke inflation. At the time when President Trump had said that fighting inflation, reducing inflation, was one of his #1 tasks that helped get him elected. So yes, there will be an effect. It will take some time to enter the U.S. system. But I believe, particularly for the U.S. Northwest, Midwest, you'll begin to see higher costs in certain commodities.
And Professor, I'd like to consult you beyond China, Canada, and Mexico. These economies trade beyond, right, the United States. How do you see this reverberating around other countries?
Canada is deeply dependent on global markets. We are far more dependent on trade than is either the United States or China, for that matter. This will, I believe, and you've already seen some public statements to this effect by Canadian political leaders and business leaders, push us to look to Asia, to look to Europe, to look to other global South markets, attempting to reduce our dependence on that U.S. market, which has served us well, but has now trapped us in a high degree of dependency with just one customer. So I think you will see perhaps closer attention to how do we restore and build our trade relations with China, for example.
I see. And beyond this, do you see opportunities, economic or political, after the dust settles?
I think it will lead, of course, the economic one I mentioned in terms of need to diversify our trade. I think there also will be, at least for the duration of the Trump presidency, a wariness in Canada about the political risks posed by the United States to our prosperity. I think there is a greater caution now about relying so much on one country, one market, and a desire to increase our exposure to other places, other economies, and to look to other friends.
And Professor Houlden, what do you see, for the next few months, like longer term?
Well, we in Canada are in a period of political instability because we have an election coming later this year. And this will be probably the #1 issue in that election. Usually elections aren't settled on foreign policy issues. This one will be different. And I think that, but all parties, the whole Canadian political system right now is, I think, more or less unified that we need to stand up to these tariffs and that we will retaliate with our own list of products which will have a higher Canadian tariff. This will be announced in this coming week.
Professor Gordon Houlden, thank you very much. Great having you.